Once you create a user account, you should assign it some privileges. So in this lecture, I'm going to walk you through the two common scenarios. The first scenario is where we have a web or a desktop application, and we want to allow this application to read and write data in a database, but nothing more. We don't want this application to be able to create a new table or modify existing tables. That's something that only an admin should be able to do. So the second scenario is for our admins. Let's say someone new joins our organization and you want to give them administrative privileges over one or more databases or perhaps the entire MySQL server. So let's start with the first scenario. For this demo, let's imagine we have an application called Moon, and this application needs to read or write data in the SQL Store database. So first we need to create a user account for this application. We call it Moon_app. This clearly specifies that this user account is for an application, not a human. So we're going to create this user account and give it a password, 1234. Once again, I want to emphasize that you should always use strong passwords. So we create this user account, beautiful. Now we use the grant statement to give this user a few privileges. We want this user to be able to select, insert, update, and delete data, as well as execute stored procedures. These are the typical privileges we want to give to a user account for an application, okay? So here are our privileges. Next, we use the on clause to specify the database. We can type SQL Store.star, and this means all tables in the SQL Store database. We could also designate a particular table, let's say the customer table. And with this, our user account will only be able to select, insert, update, and delete data in the customers table, nowhere else, okay? Not very common, but it's doable. So I'm going to revert this back to the star. Finally, we use the to clause to specify the user account. In this case, Moon app. Now, if this user account has a host or an IP address or a domain name, we should also specify that here. So let's go ahead and give this user access. Beautiful. Now I'm going to connect to our server using this user account. So back to the home page, let's create a new connection. Let's give this connection a name like Moon app connection. I'm going to set the username to Moon_app, and the password is going to be 1234. Let's test the connection. Successful, beautiful. Okay. Now let's connect with this user account. So here we can use the SQL Store database and select everything from the customers table. There you go, beautiful. But if I use a different database like SQL blog, MySQL gives me an error, access denied for user Moon app. So I don't have access to any other databases, okay? Now, back to our query window. So we covered the scenario for a web or a desktop application. Now let's look at the second scenario. So earlier we created a user account called John. Let's say John is going to be an admin. So once again, we use the grant statement to give this user certain privileges. These privileges are going to be more than reading and writing data. We want this user account to be able to create tables, create triggers, modify existing tables. So if you search for MySQL privileges, on this page, MySQL Reference Manual, you can see all the privileges supported in MySQL. So look at this table. For example, we have create routine, which allows someone to create a stored procedure or function. We have so many privileges here and can read about them on your own. But what I'm going to talk about in this lecture is all. This is the highest level of privilege we can give to someone. So typically for admins, we want to give them all privileges. So back to our query window, I'm going to grant all on. Now here we can specify a database like SQL Store. So now this user will have the highest level of privileges over all tables in this database, but we can also give them access to all databases on our server. So we can change this to star.star. This means all tables in all databases, okay? And finally, we type to John. So these are the two common scenarios that we covered in this lecture. Next, I'm going to show you how to view the privileges for a given user.